So Haven International is a byproduct of my goal, autism, with the idea of supporting families and individuals with autism. And in visiting Ghana, I discovered that there was a huge need for resources for the families, especially in the area of professional development for teachers. And when you think of the name Haven, you think a safe sanctuary or a safe place to go. And the hope was that in supporting in the training and development of teachers, healthcare professionals, and parents, the byproduct will be children who are supported and who are educated. So Haven is a global initiative, and we started in Ghana because my roots are in Ghana, and we had the support system in Ghana to be able to begin the work. And in sharing the vision with Jennifer Brock, who is the program director here, she jumped on it and provided the assistance and the support needed to be able to begin the training and development. And the vision is that we want to go to other African countries. The goal is we have a member of our team from Nigeria, another member of our team from Liberia. And as we gain the support from the various countries, we will be able to go and implement the same program and development that we've started in Ghana. Autism is a part of a spectrum of disorders and is described as mainly children with repetitive behaviors, children who have difficulty and challenges in communicating, and may have social interaction issues. So you may have a classic autistic child where they have all those three characteristics, and then you can go to the other end of the spectrum where they may just have the socialization issue. So that's one aspect of the disorder. Haven International, our concept is not just to focus on just autism, but to focus also on other children with different disabilities, what they term as intellectually disabled. So autism was one aspect of it, and because naturally I have a child with autism, that was what drew me to this work. And in visiting Ghana and talking with other people across the globe, we realized that sometimes people are confused about what we term as a child on the spectrum. So there was a need to really expand our definition to include kids on the spectrum, children with autism, children with other intellectual disabilities, where it could be a language disorder, where it could be challenges with learning and, with other learning disabilities, so that in providing resources that can be applicable for those other children as well as those with autism. So in visiting Ghana, the idea was to come back here and do an autism awareness program. And in talking with some colleagues, I brought down an occupational therapist and a speech therapist who was here in Ghana. And I also worked with a special education instructor to do a one-day autism awareness event. While we were doing the event, we now invited teachers, healthcare professionals, and parents to be a part of it. And now we gave them an opportunity to share with us where they felt there were deficits, what the needs were, and what the needs are in Ghana. And as we suspected, they were very candid. In our first training, we had 120 participants, and they shared that there was a general lack of knowledge about how to manage and work with children with disabilities, specifically autism. They also shared a lack of resources, specifically the tools that are needed, whether it's the Velcro that you use to help the children communicate in making a picture exchange communication system, the basic tools that we take for granted in other parts of the world. And as the result, they said we want more training, we want more resources. So that gave us the ammunition to now go back to the United States and connect with our providers who sponsor the program to allow us to come back. And 12 months later, we've now trained about 400 participants that have engaged in our programs. They've continually have repeated the same, comment: we want more, we want more, we want more. Hence, the need is We need more people to understand, or more teachers to know the tools and the resources that they can employ in working with children with intellectual disabilities and autism. So that has given birth to wanting to do more in terms of training and development, also establishing a school in Ghana. We've also engaged with the Ghana Educational Services, the Special Education Unit. We had conversations, and as a matter of fact, at our November 2012 autism training, the Deputy Director shared how there was a limited resources provided for education of these individuals. Right now, in your 2012 to 2020, the strategic plan, there is a great need on the government's part to provide more training for teachers. They indicated that about 1% of the resources of the education program is allocated to special education. Only 1% of resources. So that tells us there's a huge gap and it's a huge need. And so what we're doing is helping to fulfill the need and to provide the resources that the teachers want and need to do their work. So that has brought us, I know that's a long-winded way of answering the question, but it gives rise to why we're here. And the fact that people are widely supporting the work and they're embracive of what we've been doing so far. Having a child on the autism spectrum has given me the credibility in doing this work. I think back to when my son was 2.5 years old and I was given a diagnosis. Even with my professional background, I was devastated. I felt inadequate. I didn't have any sense of hope. I didn't believe that he can make any progress because I didn't know any better. But once I was engaged with other parents and other professionals who taught me, educated me, gave me a sense of hope. And that renewed sense of hope has become the stimulus and encouragement for me to also now bring that to other people. Hence the work with My Goal and the work with Haven. If the last 2 years is any indication of what's to come, I see Haven's global. I see Haven, a campus, center of excellence, training leaders, training teachers, training individuals with autism and those without autism, providing vocational programs for these individuals, not just in Ghana. I see it in Nigeria, I see it in Liberia, I see it in Kenya, going to South Africa, moving over to the Caribbean. That's what I see. Because in 2 years, we've managed to get a word out there that we can bring resources together, whether they're parents, they're healthcare professionals, they're teachers, stakeholders, accountants, architects, and create a program that recognizing the value that these individuals have within them. Later on, when I thought about the name Haven, I realized that it has such a deep, profound meaning, in that you think of Haven, you think of a safe place to go to. And when you think about these individuals and their families and the loss of hope that they have, to think I can go to Haven, I imagine that it will bring a sense of hope to them immediately. So when I look into all the different names I have named, the different programs I've been involved in, the one word stands out: hope. And I think about My Goal Autism is, our slogan is restoring hope, restoring families. I think of Haven, I think of a place to go to that will restore hope to families. All right, so having done the number of trainings that we have, we went to Akosombo this year, which is, Eastern region. But we went there specifically because there was only one school that I knew about. So you're thinking of an area where a parent lives. They have a child with autism. Where should they go and where can they go to get the training and education for their children. And I know specifically that there are families where their children stay home. They don't go to school. Why? Because the programs are not there. And if the programs are there, they're overcrowded. In the United States, we have situations where the ratio for teacher to a child of autism, my son gets one-on-one attention. In Ghana, it's practically unheard of. But that's what had allowed my son Nicholas to make the progress that he's made. So there's a huge need here. And the goal is that as more teachers are trained, parents are trained, they will have the tools that they need to be able to engage with their children at home, even on how to, engage the child to be able to request for food, and, whether it's to get an item, to get water, giving them the specific tools that they need to be able to do that. And in visiting Ghana, I realized that, how blessed I am that I have all these tools in the US, but my brothers and sisters who live here should have the same opportunity as I do. And Haven is a tool to be able to engage and get more people to have the resources that they need. I imagine having Nicholas grow up in Ghana and thinking to myself, what would it be like, or where would he be right now? And I know based on the resources that are here, I'm not quite sure he would have made the same progress. I say that because I know how intensive the therapies he's received. We have him in school from September all the way through August with only 3 weeks off. He gets one-on-one attention. He gets home therapy. We have exhaustive resources in medical related things for him. Now, if I'm in Ghana, perhaps I may have the resources, but I may lack the access to the same specialized programs. However, there are new resources that are emerging into this country. I just recently spoke to a chiropractor. Nicholas sees a chiropractor in the United States. We also see nutritionists. I know that that's coming to Ghana. So clearly, even with resources, when I say resources, I mean financial resources. There are some things you can get in Ghana. However, there's some things you cannot get. And this is why there's a great need to continue to raise awareness, ring the bells of what the needs are, so that children who live here can have somewhat an opportunity to gain the same access to resources as do children in Ghana and in the United States. So our training, it focuses on primarily 3 groups: teachers, healthcare professionals, and caregivers. And the caregivers can include both parents and also family members. With the teachers, we engage them to learn new tools and specific principles that they can employ in the classroom to engage the children to learn. With the parents, we educate them about tools that they can use at home that will elicit learning for their children. And with the healthcare providers, we identify and remind them of specific things that they should be looking out for in identifying the children who are on the disabilities, so that with the early identification, early screening, we can begin to employ specific tools to help these individuals overcome the challenges that they have. So the idea that autism and other intellectual disabilities are as a result of a supernatural element in society is there and is discussed and is something people have believed for a long time. But I believe with more awareness and with children getting better as a result of specific interventions, where the interventions may be training and instructional techniques, more and more families are willing to come out and acknowledge that their child may be on a spectrum. In raising awareness by talking and describing what the manifestations of autism are, we recognize that what in the past was described as a child that's demon possessed, or a child that their grandmother or grandfather has done some kind of witchcraft on, now we're realizing that it is a medical issue. And the medical issue that may also be manifesting as a behavioral issue. And one of the things that we do in our training is actually talk about the role of dietary changes that has impact in the way the child behaves. And also recognizing that in the United States, for example, the Academy on Pediatrics have recognized that 60% of the children with intellectual disabilities, specifically autism, actually have stomach issues. And if you think about a child who is nonverbal, who is now experiencing pain and bloating, the best way, the only way probably that they can express their pain is to cry and to tantrum, so to speak. And if somebody doesn't understand what's happening to the child, they would just think that they are having a brain disorder or they're having some problems and we need to check them. And in understanding that it's a medical issue that is translating into a behavioral problem, now allows us to address that medical issue in that instance. So it's becoming more clear and clear that there is a medical basis for the behavioral issues that we see in autism. Most parents recognize something is wrong, especially if the child loses language, as my son did. He was 2.5 years old. I noticed that he was no longer responding to his name. I noticed that when we called him, he was lost in his own world. When we entered the room, he didn't even acknowledge that we were there. And that's very unnatural for a 2.5-year-old. We went to seek medical attention and we were given this diagnosis called autism spectrum disorder. Didn't even know what that was. That was us a few years back, and that hasn't really changed much when you speak to other parents. A lot of them notice the loss of language or the fact that the child may not be communicating appropriately. Sometimes the children will repeat your question instead of answering them. When you ask them, how are you, they will say, how are you? When you ask them, what's your name, instead of responding their name appropriately, they will say, what's your name? If that continues for a while, naturally that's going to be concerning. And especially if you're a parent that have more than one child, you can now compare the development of this particular one to other children and you realize that there's something off. A lot of us come from cultures where we were told that, oh, the child is not speaking, that's because your grandmother didn't speak until so and so. You know, we're told, oh, he'll catch up, you just don't worry. So for many of us, we ignore the signs that are there early and we wait till it's quite a bit late. So one of the things I do when I talk to families is, and especially women who are, pregnant or have infants, I said, pay attention to the development. The earlier you intervene, the better. So the child who may be languishing in their development, we need to engage them right away, prod them, encourage them, specifically be attentive to how they're developing. It's very, very critical. Many people, when they don't know the signs, may ignore it. And even if we're told that our child will speak later, there's nothing wrong with intervening and engaging the services of a speech therapist, which is the reason why I go out there and talk about autism awareness and other intellectual disability issues. It's very critical that if you're noticing that something is not going right with your child, so perhaps when you call their name, they're not turning, when you speak, they're not responding, they're not pointing, it's very important that you ask the doctor and talk to them right away, because those are very critical elements that we should be seeing in a child's development. So as parents, if you're noticing, or even as a caregiver, as an aunt, as an uncle, encourage that those issues be looked at right away. If you're having a nagging suspicions that something is wrong, prove yourself wrong, that there's nothing wrong. When Nicholas was 18 months and I started to notice that he wasn't turning when I was calling his name, I started to ignore it until a friend of mine said, Genevieve, I think you really should look into it and ask the doctor about it. And that's really what prompted me to seek attention, because otherwise, in the back of my mind, I knew something was wrong, but I ignored it until somebody encouraged me. And it turned out that there was something going on with him. At the end of the day, it's important to go out there, ask, seek, request, probe until you get your answers for anything that's nagging in your mind. Early intervention is key to making progress and seeing these kids achieve the qualities that are in them, which is every child has a bright future. And that can be accomplished by engaging them actively at home, in school, in churches, wherever they are. And that can be done easily in a matter of just specifically having these children talk, engage them in activities, engage them in, programs, everywhere we go. And sometimes as parents, we make the mistake of thinking we want to hide our children. We don't want somebody to know that, something is off, so to speak. So instead of bringing them out and engaging them in the community, we keep them in the home. And that's very prevalent in our culture. However, we find that when we get them out there, we point things out to them. We ask them to repeat words back to us. Even if they're not repeating, studies have shown that they are absorbing and they're learning. So Haven International, the vision is not just to work with families with children with intellectual disabilities, but also include adults. And like in the United States, where there are limited programs available for these individuals, we hope to provide programs that will be targeted to the adults with intellectual disabilities, including autism. Specifically looking at vocational programs, with a young adult who may lack specific skills in going into the workforce, where naturally all our children or young adults may engage in these type of work. Our young adults or adults with autism and other intellectual disabilities also need skill sets so they could be productive members of society. And one of our vision is to have a vocational center where skills will be taught at the levels that these individuals can learn. And so I'm extremely excited about that prospect, because that's a big area that there's a big opportunity to make an impact. There are instances where an individual with autism or with other intellectual disabilities may also now have other overriding comorbid issues. So when I say comorbid issues, I can also describe it as they might have cognitive dysfunction. They can also be blind. They could also be deaf. And as a matter of fact, I have in one of my groups, a child with autism who's also deaf. And for a parent, I just can't even imagine how do you communicate, how do you begin to connect with their child, and I'm amazed at how the parents do it. They've learned sign language, and that's how they communicate with this individual. So not only does the child has his cognitive issues and his ability to engage with other people, but now when people are speaking to him, they're talking, but he can't understand them unless they use sign language. So that becomes a big limiting factor in our ability to communicate with him. But it's amazing how resilient this family is because they've chosen to engage with the world and to let the world know how important it is to recognize their child as someone special. But we don't always have success stories like that because there are families who are fearful that their family, the entire family, will be looked upon or stigmatized because that child has multiple disabilities. So in some circles, they would describe that child as having a multiple disability because it's not just one, there are multiple issues. But generally, it is extremely difficult just having that autism by itself. But then when you compound it with another disability, it's really, really difficult. And yet, there are people who are making it through and doing the best that they can. The vision of Haven is to grow with individuals with disabilities, specifically autism and other intellectual disabilities, by providing an environment where from pre-K all the way through secondary school level, we will grow with them. We're envisioning an inclusive program where the individuals with intellectual disabilities will be in the same program with kids without. And as they move from one class level to the next class level, we're growing with them. And depending on their abilities, we will engage them in programs that will give them the skills to be successful future engineers, musicians, artisans, recognizing that they have skill set that we need to cultivate and we need to be able to bring out of them. Every individual has a potential to contribute significantly to our society. And it's a matter of unlocking that particular door that brings out the best in them. We know that Mozart was on the spectrum. Einstein was on the spectrum. And there are beautiful people who are making great inventions every day who potentially are on the spectrum and have been documented to be on the spectrum. So I believe that every individual, regardless of where they start, how they start, can finish strong, doing something great for our society. Who knows, maybe in Africa we'll find the answer. You know, the interesting thing is that like HIV and other medical issues, sometimes we find different strains that may be present in one part of the world from another. They may be a subset of individuals with autism who may present with specific type of issues that we can relate back to the environment that they're in. And we're learning that environment has a huge component to dealing with this disorder. And so perhaps we might be able to find a cohort of individuals with this disability in Ghana, in Africa, that may be different and perhaps may help us to understand more about this disorder. Collaboration is a key factor in doing this work, in raising awareness and also raising resources to help these families. Collaboration comes in the form of agencies that will fund organizations like Haven and My Goal Autism. Collaboration in the form of working with the governmental agencies to provide the resources that are needed for the teachers to do the work that they're needed to do. Collaborations in the form of doing more research with hospitals, with clinics, with schools, to be able to advance the knowledge in this area. Haven is an instrument to bring multiple resources together in the form of collaborating with the governmental agencies, in working with international agencies such as the Autism Speaks, Autism Research Institute, WHO, CDC, USAID, and other corporations and companies that are looking to partner with organizations such as Haven to do the work in bringing resources to families, teachers, healthcare professionals, and individuals with intellectual disabilities and autism.